just take another second to open the screen. Thank you very much. First of all, to the organization, for giving me this opportunity, and really I feel honored. Also, Ramadan Kareem to all the listeners. What I plan to do is to first of all briefly introduce the topic in very general terms, and then go a bit deeper into the issue, first by raising some questions. As a teacher, I think the most important thing is to raise the right question. I may not have the right answers to all of those, but the purpose is to actually help you think about those, direct you in a humble way to the sources available on the subject, and then leave it up to your judgment to probe the issue further. And then, of course, I will go into the sources of my whole discussion a bit in an extensive manner, and then finally talk about the 5 core or central principles of governance in Islam in a step-by-step fashion. So that's the kind of general outline. Let me first say a few introductory words. The subject is, of course, of huge significance in the modern era, partly because of the prevalent transitions going through in many of the Muslim states. New constitutions are being framed. Various governments are, of course, trying to improve their governance models, and there is a kind of a test and trial method as well. Secondly, the modern era is much different than, I would argue, even governance patterns even 100 years ago, because of the scientific and technological advancement, the new tools of education, and new kinds of services that are available to the people. So public expectations are huge, governance models are in transition, and there is this debate between, if I may call that, secular versus the religious. Whether when we say principles of governance in Islam, are we talking about a theocratic state? Are we talking about some specifically divine injunctions pertinent to this issue? Or are we talking about human endeavors? Human endeavors in a sense that we look at the divine sources, we look at the principles provided by the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his companions and other great Muslim leaders, and deduce and deduct and infer some of the principles for our modern thinking. So that's the big test. This is the kind of general arena in which we are stepping into. So, as I mentioned, first and foremost, what are the issues we are looking at? So, I argue that by looking at the questions first, we'll be able to continuously think about these when I'll proceed with my humble submissions. The first question, of course, is whether Islam is really concerned about politics and governance, or is it because the argument is that religion pertains to our spiritual well-being. It provides us morals and ethics and general guidance about how to live our lives. It gives us an insight into the world hereafter, but it is not directly linked to our day-to-day affairs in any sense. This is, again, the modern understanding of religion in, I would argue, Muslim, in a cultural sense in the Western civilization, also in the secular sense. That's one thing we have to constantly probe into, and I'll give my own answer. I'll give my insight for you to think about and probe further. The second question is, are there any specific instructions on the subject in Quran and Hadith? Then, if there is indeed specific instruction in religious injunctions, then where else we can look for guidance which provide us insights and examples? And last but not least, is it relevant for us to really compare Islamic principles of governance to modern and prevalent political systems within the Muslim world and outside the Muslim world? And when I say Muslim world, I specifically mean Muslim majority states, irrespective of what the system of government in those countries are, and there are a variety of rules and principles and constitutions that are being currently used. So kindly keep in mind these 4 questions. I will refer to these at different stages, but just at a very preliminary stage, if I have to answer these, to the very first question, is Islam concerned about politics and governance? I think yes, of course, because Islam provides not only a comprehensive look at the life as a whole, but it also deals with our social relations. It also deals with individuals as well as human beings in a collective sense. And in a collective sense, human beings not only interact with each other for spiritual reasons or for very mundane reasons, but also in terms of their organization, also in terms of how they deal with each other. What are the principles, the rules, the regulations that govern them? Hence, of course, Islam as a religion which looks at the well-being of the human being deals with social and political and other organizations. By that, it doesn't mean that there is a specific set of principles that give an outline of a political system. No, but there are certain specific principles that are taught by Islam which help us devise a political system, a governance system based on those principles. It may not be a rigid system. It is not that there are specific outlines of a constitution that were provided, but there were principles provided which help us deduct important insights. The second issue, are there any specific instructions? And I'll go on to the next screen. In terms of Quran and Hadith, yes. And I just have a few examples to respond to this second question that I have raised. For instance, in Quran and Surah Al-Ma'idah, it clearly says, if you do judge between them justly. Allah loves the just. I think there's a clear inference of a justice system. I refer to the second verse of the Quran, which is on your screen, which I translate as, show integrity for the sake of Allah, bearing witness with justice. Do not let hatred for a people incite you into becoming unjust. I think this provides us a central feature of a justice system which is above any bias, which is above any prejudice, irrespective of what a system or a country thinks about any issue or any community, or whether it is ethnic, political, sectarian, of whatever sort. The system of justice has to be absolutely above board. It has to be above any of those biases of the people who are involved in. Hadith, which is also very relevant, which pertains to a governance system, says authority is a trust, and on the day of judgment it is a cause of humiliation and repentance except for one who fulfills its obligations and discharges the duties attendant thereon. So leading the people in getting involved into decision-making processes is a specific trust, and there are certain very specific conditions and obligations involved with that. And last but not the least, is another hadith which says the worst of guardians is the cruel ruler. Also then making an explanation, not saying what system might be cruel or not. It is just a ruler or a person or a set of people who are involved. If they are not going by certain norms, morals and values taught by Islam, then it falls into a different category. This was just an example to explain my second point, that yes, Quran and Hadith provides many provisions, many insights, many, even I will say, instructions that are directly relevant to governance system. The third question, if you remember, I had shown you in the previous slide, was, so what are the other sources of guidance? Yes, Quran and Hadith provides us the general principles. So the next stage, we have to look for guidance. In the last 1400 years of Islamic history, jurists and scholars and writers of fiqh, of sharia, of other sciences as well, have continuously dealt with this issue and came up with many specific deductions. Some of those were popular, some were not, but there has been this constant history of scholarship within Islam on these issues. and most of those looked at the examples and the models provided by the companions of the Holy Prophet, and specifically the first four caliphs, who in their different ways and in different era, over a period of about 25 years, the first four caliphs, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, Hazrat Umar Khattab, Hazrat Usman Ghani, and Hazrat Ali ibn Abi Talib, together they provided the initial guidance and framework in slightly different ways, which provide us with a set of ideas, set of very creative ideas pertaining to administration, pertaining to governance, which for us are models not to be implemented as exactly as in that era, because the cultural context was different, the historical, the educational, the political context was different. But from those we can devise, and that's the era, those are the people to whom we can look up to for those insights and for those guidelines. So before I get into the 5 major principles which I have deduced as per my own understanding, partly to provoke a debate and discussion and dialogue, and partly to explain if there is any outline on the subject. But before I get into that, I'll first very briefly go through 4 major quotations from those 4 great scholars and leaders of Islam, because I think all of them said things and did things which are very relevant to the topic of governance. First, with Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, who had a very comparatively limited time at the helm of affairs, about 2 years and 3 months, but when he took over the job, or it was when it was thrust upon him to lead the Muslim community just after the demise or sad demise of the Prophet of Islam, his very first speech when he was taking over the reins of government, it was about accountability, and I quote, he said, "O people, I have been appointed over you, though I am not the best among you. If I do well, then help me, and if I act wrongly, then correct me. Truthfulness is synonymous with fulfilling the trust, and lying is equivalent to treachery. The weak among you is deemed strong by me until I return to them that which is rightfully theirs, inshallah. And the strong among you is deemed weak by me until I take from them what is rightfully someone else, inshallah." I think he very clearly explained this, that he was accountable. He whatever he thought were the standing instructions, he opened those up for discussion and debate. He invited everyone to challenge him if they think that any of his steps or pronouncements were not the best ones. He was humble in his approach by saying he was not the best among you. He was also explaining that leaders are accountable. Leaders are answerable. I think that will be the first important principle that I'll deduce, that leaders have to be answerable and accountable, and then the responsibility he took upon himself was also very central to this theme, when he argued that his responsibility is that he will be on the side of the weak in terms of providing them or helping them getting justice. So everyone was deemed to be equal in the eyes of the governing authorities. That is another important principle. Let me move to some of the principles taught by the second caliph, Hazrat Umar Khattab, and that the one I picked is about rights of minorities. And I'll quote, which is the screen in front of you. "This is the protection which the servant of God, Umar, the ruler of the believers, has granted to the people of Aliyah, Jerusalem." And this was kind of a contract or a treaty that he had signed when he was in a leading position. He said, "The protection is for their lives and properties, their churches and crosses, their sick and healthy, and for all their co-religionists. Their churches shall not be used for habitation, nor shall they be demolished. There shall be no compulsion for these people in the matter of religion," unquote. I think this provides us another central feature of Islamic governance system, which is founded on the idea of pluralism. If you happen to be in a Muslim state, that doesn't mean that Islam will impose in any way its ideas, its principles on people who belong to any different religious tradition. It also hints at a freedom to have a religion, or freedom to practice one's religion according to their own views, their own principles. This, in a modern sense also, I think provides us a very central feature. And mind you, we are talking about 1400 years ago, when the norms of governance or the principles used by the empires were very different. Those were, by and large, historically in a global sense, times which were quite dogmatic. Even 1,000 years later, which would be 400 years ago, think of empires around the world, both within the Muslim tradition and others. There were cases when things were imposed on others. If we look at the teachings coming to us from the second caliph of Islam, then pluralism, tolerance, openness, and broad-mindedness are the principles that are so obviously and clearly being taught by him. I move on to the example from the third caliph of Islam, Hazrat Usman Ghani. And his first quote that I picked is about tyranny. And he said, and I quote, "See that there is no tyranny against people, particularly the poor and the orphans." And this is a theme I'll come to later on as well, that Islam's governance model is heavily biased, if I may say, heavily biased in support of the poor and the destitute and those who are really lowest in terms of income, in terms of authority, in terms of the privileges in a society. Islam really goes out of its way to support them in terms of egalitarianism, in terms of really well-being of the very ordinary people. And if I may just hint at this point, that's what one of the major principles, if I say, is of modern welfare state as well. To look at the demands, expectations, and needs of the very poor in a society and build a system which first and foremost look at the demand of those who are without resources, who maybe are without the opportunities to education or to earn as the other members of society. So very clearly, this even a very short and brief statement, but it clearly explains that if the poor and the orphans are not getting their due, then a state will be deemed to be tyrannical. The second quotation here is about on the criteria of justice, and here Hazrat Usman had said, "The dictates of justice demand that a proper equation should be maintained between the rights and obligations of the people." Very clearly, state has its, or government has its own rights, and people already also have their rights. And we have seen even in the last 100 years, or last about 60, 70 years, when the modern state has come into being and has thrived since then, the real issue everywhere is how do you balance what the rights state have and how people can demand their rights, and if there are any effective mechanisms through which ordinary people can demand their rights against the state, against the government, against any other group as well. So I think these are also very insightful and very relevant to the modern sense. And then to the last of the four caliphs, Hazrat Ali ibn Abi Talib, who had written extensively on governance. Among all the caliphs, depending on how much of the materials they left through their speeches, through their writings, we are fortunate to have a lot of materials from Ali ibn Abi Talib's time, especially his one famous letter to Governor of Egypt, who was appointed, a person who was appointed Governor of Egypt, Malik ibn Ashtar. If you get a chance to look at that letter, that is often referred to even in modern political systems and United Nations, some of the principles that were enunciated there. And the first one that I quote is, Hazrat Ali had said, "The service of mankind prepares a person for leadership." A very open invitation for serving humanity, and that being a criterion on how a leader should think about. This, I think, is a very short statement, but very insightful about the vision that a reader has to keep in mind. It's not about a certain community, ethnic or political. It is not about a group or a set of states even. This is a global vision serving the mankind. Secondly, which is, I picked a quotation from that letter that I just referred to Malik ibn Ashtar, which is very specific to state management or administration, which says officials of the state must be closely supervised and monitored by the head of the government. Their recruitment must be on merit, and a credible accountability mechanism must be in place. Otherwise, tyranny, corruption, and misrule will reign. Here also, I think this actually one builds upon some of the things that we have read earlier, said from the first three caliphs, and also the Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we can clearly see a pattern in the first 25 years of Muslim history, especially after the demise of the Prophet, where each of the caliph came out in their own way, in their own, based on their own wisdom and experience, but provided us with central principles of governance. So I just wanted to give an example to regarding my third question that I had raised, that even other than Quran and Hadith, we have these examples from these models who learned from these great sources of Quran and Hadith, and then showed us the way how a modern, effective, credible, pro-people model can be developed. None of them, or even the Prophet, ever said the system has to be of this shape and this model, or this is the name that, a certain name that they devised. For example, that it has to be, for instance, democracy, dictatorship, or I'm just giving example. These are modern terminologies which came much after Islam. But just as an example, I'm saying, or presidential system we talk about, parliamentary system of government. These are all modern constructs, very important human endeavors to develop a system benefiting the people. But in the Islamic context, there was no certain framework or formula that was provided. Only principles were provided, and it was left to the human genius to come up in their own age, building new models, building new frameworks, building new institutions, but certain principles were provided that so long as you take care of the poor, so long as you pick people on merit, so long as your administration system is equitable, just, so long as you're thinking about the rights of the ordinary people, irrespective of their political orientation or irrespective of even their religious identity, then you are going towards building a system which can be called an Islamic system of governance. And this background, a bit longish background, I must admit, helps me now coming finally to the 5 principles or the 5 central features of what I call an Islamic system of governance, or principles of Islamic governance. In brief, before even I get into those 5, in brief, learning from the 4 caliphs and Quran and Hadith, and of course, because of the time, I cannot give you more examples from there, but this is my understanding that the purpose of government, or the purpose of governance in Islam is establishment of a just order, which is based not on any fixated, rigid set of rules, but on rational thinking. It is not about imposition of an idea, but it teaches us tolerance, and it is founded on the ideas of equality and equity. Pursuit of knowledge, which I'll come to later on, which means helping people be educated and knowledgeable. That also is a very important pillar of modern governance system, because Islam realizes, and I'll give you specific quotes later on, Islam realizes that unless you are educated, unless you're knowledgeable, unless you have the tools to be able to develop a certain vision and understanding, the system which will be created will not be able to function effectively. So education and the pursuit of knowledge in itself is a very important part and pillar of this governance system. But from another lens, the purpose of governance is that Islamic principles also teach us to nurture leaders who are humane and accountable, and who will not build the system based on their personal likes and dislikes, but they will establish institutions. And I can come up with many examples later on where, especially in the first 25 years, all of the caliphs focused on establishing institutions. For instance, in the very first case of Hazrat Abu Bakr, the Muslim areas were divided into what today we can call provinces. In the times of Hazrat Umar, the institutions of, for instance, what we can call modern-day police was established, or a law enforcement system was established. In times of Hazrat Umar, the military forces were organized on modern lines. In times of Hazrat Ali ibn Abi Talib, there were clear injunctions monitoring the performance of administrators and those people who were appointed as governors. They were given clear-cut instructions of how they should ensure that their juniors or their staff are not involved in corruption and embezzlement of funds. So the establishing an accountable government is also one of these principles, which I think these principles are very, very relevant to even the modern day political systems. And as promised, now I finally come to the 5 central principles, and hopefully in 10 minutes, which is my the time given to me, I'll be able to finish these 5 principles. I'll go through very briefly the first one, which you might have guessed by now, because that's in a step-by-step process. I'm building my own argument as well. The first principle of governance, good governance, is establishment of a system of justice. And there are so many quotations from the Islamic history, but I picked one hadith of the Prophet of Islam when he had said, the nations before you were destroyed because they would punish the lower class criminals according to the law, but would let go those from the higher class, unquote. I cannot think of a better definition of a rule of law than from this quotation. I think this pronounces, this defines that system of law or the rule of law is a central feature of Islamic governance system. A law which is same for everyone, irrespective of whether you are high or low in a political sense or in the sense of your status in a certain society. The law has to be same for everyone. The law of the state, whatever the rulers, the people decide the law to be for them. And this also, I want to link this with this debate in the Western world, whether any Muslim country can have a representative system of government or democracy, saying that the religious laws and religious rules and religious principles and religious injunctions cannot be relevant to a modern political system. I think this quotation single-handedly challenges that version. It is a choice of the people whether they seek their inspiration and guidance from a secular political philosophy or a religious principle, or what they think is their divine guidance. I move on to the next point. A quotation from Hazrat Ali, which he had said about justice system: abandoning equity and justice leads to tyranny and oppression. And last, from another great luminary, and there are many quotations in my next slides which I have picked from great jurists, writers, or scholars of Islam who are seen as very credible and mainstream. And the third quotation that I have here is, actually this is from the letter of Malik ibn Ashtar to Malik ibn Ashtar, which says, only people of excellent character and high caliber with meritorious records are worthy of becoming judges. So Islam was not only providing the principles, it was getting into the very specifics as well about the criterion of judges. So coming back to this idea, and this is actually one point out of my 5 where you can find innumerable quotations and innumerable guidelines actually in Quran, which so often God talks about justice, and rulers whosoever in a historical sense were appreciated or were talked about as examples, their justice or their being just was always referred as a very important characteristic or trait of their personality. So justice is the first criterion. Second, as I mentioned, education as a right. And this is very important because with Islam is making a leader incumbent or making a leader responsible to establish a system of education which is open to everyone. And two or three of the hadiths, which I'm sure some of my listeners will immediately think of, are so clear and so forceful. The first hadith, which is right on the screen, to acquire knowledge is binding upon all Muslims, whether male or female. Another quotation that we know also is not only very credible but insightful, that the Prophet of Islam had said, go to China even if you have to get education. And at that time, of course, it was not a 5 or 10 hours flight to China. It meant months and months of walking or going through ocean, or it was a very difficult task. The Prophet was saying that if you have to go in pursuit of knowledge and you are out searching for education and knowledge and wisdom, go to any part of this world. In those times, it meant actually to go to the other part of the world. You may spend a lifetime in pursuit of knowledge. That was what was clearly the meaning of those ahadiths. Another quotation, which is the second one on your screen, the ink of the scholar is more holy than the blood of the martyr. Also a very relevant one. Some writers thought that there is some controversy about this, but I have seen in my own view, in my own research, this to be a very credible hadith. And this is also relevant to the modern times, not to underestimate any aspect of Islam or the requirements of the times, but the third hadith that is there actually substantiates this. When Prophet is saying, who honors the learned honors me. So whosoever is educated and knowledgeable is considered as one of the prime examples of what a Muslim should be. The last quotation here is also very relevant, which says, knowledge calls upon action. If answered, it will remain, but otherwise it will disappear. And this reminds me of some of the quotations from the second caliph as well as the fourth caliph, who have both emphasized that knowledge and action are related. Theoretical knowledge is good and very important, but unless you can translate your knowledge into action in terms of using different ethics and morals and principles, implementing those into effective norms and customs and rules for the betterment of the people, then that knowledge, which is purely, if I may, for the lack of any other word, I'm using theoretical, though theoretical knowledge of course is also important, but in this sense, unless you are utilizing your knowledge base for the betterment of the people, such knowledge is of little value. Or Islam encourages this close link between knowledge and action. What I deduce, and these are, I'm repeating myself, these are my humble ideas, or this is how I understand Islamic principles of governance, but I am providing you with sources from within the Islamic traditions, that education as a right, what actually United Nations calls for today, and saying or calling it education as a right has a certain meaning, which means that if you are helping to build a school, or you're helping some people get education, it is not a charity work that you're doing. It is an obligation upon you that you are fulfilling. So all those who, by inference, all those who are educated or who have access to sources of getting education and knowledge, it is incumbent upon them to help others get it, or they will be held responsible on the Day of Judgment. In my understanding, whether they help others get the same education or not. That's why I'm making the argument that education as a right is a central and one of the significant pillars of Islamic governance system. Only an educated society can govern itself according to the real principles of Islam. I move on to my next point, which is centrality of consultation in policy making. And often within Muslim jurisprudence and Muslim scholarship, you'll find this statement that their affairs are decided by consultations between them. Also from another hadith, I get this statement that broad-based consultation is a great support for decision making, and consultation enriches one's understanding. There's this debate within the Muslim scholars whether by consultation we only mean that you are seeking someone's advice and then it is the leader who decides whether he or she should implement that, or whether the consultation is binding. And Muslim scholars have come up with 2 or 3 very important ideas. First is this idea of Rida al-Awam, which means popular consent, which means that of course when you're seeking guidance from people, or when you're seeking their opinion, or in some cases their approval, whatever people say is binding on the leaders. Yes, it was probably not binding in the years when, of course, the Prophet of Islam was there, and when his companions and very, very learned scholars were leading the Muslim community, because they were known for their wisdom, they were known for their closeness with the Prophet, and they had learned all the principles from the Prophet. So their understanding had a different meaning, had a different value. But since then, I think there are clear ideas, or there are clear areas where it is so obvious to me in my reading of history that Muslim leaders were supposed, when they were reaching out to the people for their advice and guidance, it was incumbent upon them to go by that. But this, I must add, is an issue of dispute within the Muslim jurisprudence and within the Muslim thinking and within the Muslim politics. But the idea of collective responsibility also is important, and I encourage you to think more about it. What I am offering you is the idea of a consultation which is not only broad and binding, but which is institutional as well. It is just in the modern sense, when we talk about referendum, for instance, or we talk about elections or voting, that is a form of seeking people's guidance, or getting or doing consultation with the people. Voting or elections is just a modern title or name associated with it. My view, and I am emphasizing that, is that this idea of shura, or this idea of consultation, actually is directly linked to the idea of representative system. I move on to the next point, which is the 4th point, and I'm running out of time, but the last 2 points. The 4th principle of governance is about welfare of the people. And I quote the 2nd Caliph, Hazrat Umar, who had said, actually he had heard, the background to this is that he heard from one of his governors, one of his close associates, who talked about the governor of Egypt, who apparently had misbehaved with someone. So the Caliph Umar addressed him and said, "Since when did you impose slavery on human beings while their mothers bore them free?" I think it's a very clear idea supporting freedom for everyone, or equality among all the people in a state. It is followed by a quotation from Hazrat Ali, when he had said, "A leader must send a clear message to the community about his priorities through a fair, just, and impartial attitude in all dealings. He must ensure that influential persons do not dare take undue advantage of their power in society, and the poor should not feel alienated and discriminated against." So the focus of not only these 2 quotations, but I can quote dozens and dozens of quotations from the first 25 years, the times of the Khulafai Rashidin, where the welfare of the ordinary people was deemed to be the most important thing that the leader was doing. Unfortunately, we have not seen that trend continue in various parts of the Muslim world later on, or even presently. But that the welfare of the ordinary people, those who are really in the most difficult situation in terms of income, in terms of resources, in terms of opportunities, they should be at the center of the concern of the government. I think that is also very not only important but clearly defined principle that that Islam had enunciated or provided to Muslims. That brings me to my last point, which is the criterion of leadership. All of these things, tolerance, a system of justice, an effective system of education, all of these possibilities become real when the leadership is capable to deliver. So Islam is very much interested in the type of leadership that is available, and that is not only in the political sense, but also in the social sense. It is also in the religious sense. All those people who are responsible for defining religious ideas need a very creative sense. In social organizations, the leaders have to be empowered. Also in the political sense, the leaders have to be wise. And the first quotation in front of you, and this is just, I think, this last slide, so please bear with me for a couple of more minutes. I'm quoting Hazrat Umar, the second caliph, who had said, very interestingly, it said, the army exists to protect the people of the nation, not protect the leader from the people. And I picked this because this explains that all the infrastructure that a state has at its disposal is meant for the betterment and protection of the people, not to safeguard the interests of one leader or a group of people. Hazrat Ali's quotation is next, which says, the most rightful of all persons to hold leadership position is the one who's most competent and learned. So the criterion, whether you have to appoint a judge or an administrator or a governor, the criterion is not political affiliation, not ethnic affiliation, not sectarian identity, but the competence and knowledge level of a certain person. This again is very relevant to what we are seeing in the modern political systems the world over. Wherever the developed countries have devised the constitutions and effective administrative systems, I think these principles actually are very clearly at work in those cases. And the last quotation I have is about leaders, that leaders are responsible for any miscarriage of justice and misuse of authority by subordinate administrators. So the top leaders are deemed to be responsible for delivering not only social justice, but also nominating and appointing or selecting or electing or getting people elected who really are the best of the best. And this brings up to my final concluding remarks, that if looking at all these 5 principles, and at the end actually, if you're interested, you can look at all the sources that I have used for my presentation, but just my concluding, very brief concluding remarks are directly linked to the whole idea of principle of governance in Islam. And if I may say that, I think the core message of Islam is, in these few words, that authoritarianism runs counter to Islam. Secondly, pro-people policies have to be encouraged. Third, public officials at every level are accountable. Fourth, without justice and equity, an Islamic model cannot be created. Fourth, without tolerance and pluralism, a real Islamic governance model cannot be established. And last but not the least, that the whole system of Islamic governance is looking at the welfare and interests of the common and the very ordinary people. So statement is that, in my view, Islam provides a very modern, a very progressive system of governance which is open to creative ideas. It is not rigid. It asks for establishment of a just order, and any new ideas which fit into this model, which fit into these, or which can be used to implement these principles, will be deemed as Islamic. There is no rigid, fixative system that Islam taught us. Anything which helps establishment of a just order is what Islamic system of governance is. With this, I'll close my comments. Thank you very much for listening patiently to my humble insights.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hassan Abbas, for a very, very intriguing and comprehensive presentation. Folks, we are now open for question and answers. If you have a question, you could raise your hand. There is a hand icon available on your webinar console. If you click on it, I'll be able to unmute your microphone. You could speak directly to Dr. Abbas, or you could put your questions in the question box, and I'll be happy to read them over on your behalf. Let me go. There was a question, I think, from Brother Shahid Tanveer. Can you hear me, brother?
Yes, I'm here. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Could you please introduce yourself and from where you're calling, and feel free to ask the question.
Thank you, Brother Ali. This is Shahid Tanveer from Dubai. I work for Roads and Transport Authority, and I'm interested in the subject of governance in general, especially coming from technology background. So I'm involved in technology governance, but in the process of studying about technology governance, I've also been interested in the subject of Islamic governance. So my question is, first of all, thank you very much, Professor Abbas, for giving a very insightful presentation, and it has certainly given a lot of ideas and food for thought. So my question is, do you believe that the principles of governance as per your presentation can be applied to all Muslim countries regardless of the type of rule of government?
Very good question and a very meaningful question, and I appreciate that. I think yes, in principle it can be and it should be, but then various alterations, if I may use the word a bit carefully, will be needed because justice or establishment of the rule of law, then if that is seen as the central feature, then the system, the governing pattern has to change. For example, in many countries, if I may refer to South Asia, for example, originally I hail from Pakistan, so let me criticize where I originally come from, with all my love and deep respect for my country of origin. For instance, even despite the democratic process, we see feudal elites in certain areas to be very powerful. When those feudal elites come into power or even are part of the larger governance system, they ensure that through legislation they pursue their own interests. So long as, I'm arguing, the feudal elite remains relevant to the political system, it will be very difficult to make the system relevant for the ordinary people, or those whose interests and rights are trampled upon. So yes, there are limits to that you can use some of the important principles of governance within any system. Some of the major principles can be, especially if the leadership is conscientious. If a person at the helm of affairs, at the top leader, whatever the title is of that person, whether a general or a dictator or a leader or a prime minister or president or a king or a monarch, so long as some basic principles, there is flexibility in this, that some of the basic principles about justice system can be utilized. But then there is a limit of progress if the system in itself is a bit dogmatic, or the system in itself is not modern or not open to discussion and debate. Even in a democratic system, I would say, if in a democracy, people are not allowed to criticize the system, or their rights are trampled upon because through the democratic process, only people of one ethnic group, that we have seen in some South Asian countries, that because of the predominance of one ethnic group, you'll always have, even through a representative system, have people only representing one ethnic group. That ethnic group will ensure that their own interests are served. So there are limits even in the democratic systems. Similar are the limitations in any of the authoritarian or dictatorial or monarchical systems. Each one of these can develop, progress, and change. For instance, if I give the example, maybe not very relevant, but somewhat relevant, when the system of governance was changed in Britain in the last 1,000 years, I would say initially there was a challenge to the ruling elite. But then they allowed the ruling elite to continue to have their titles. Still, there's Queen of England. But what can she do if the parliament decides on any matter? She cannot do anything. Or the king there might not be able to do anything. The point I'm referring to, that yes, there have been transitions and changes and transformations within the system. So your question is, again, very thoughtful. I would continue myself to think about it, but my immediate reaction to that is that some of the basic principles, if we have conscientious rulers who are responsible and accountable, then those 2 or 3 major principles can be used in any system for the betterment of the people. But then if we really want a flowering of the system, or all the principles of governance system to be implemented in an effective fashion, then some form of representative government where leaders are accountable, answerable, because if Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq can say that if I'm wrong, please correct me and check me, then I will not think of any other person to be above the law. So unless those changes are incorporated, a complete transformation of the system to best utilize the principles of Islamic governance cannot be utilized. That's my view.
Thank you.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. I would like to, my name is Muhammad Mustafa Mahmoud. I am the CEO of Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, the organization which is organizing this event. I would like to thank Professor Hassan Abbas a lot for his insightful presentation. I just want to ask if there is any literatures or thinking happened at the level of applying the principle of good governance at a corporate level, not at a political, national, government level.
Thank you very much. First, I would also like to appreciate, not because you are my host today, but I think the Madinah Institute is actually contributing in a very significant fashion, and it's always a treat to visit your website and to look at all the programs that you are conducting. So I want to congratulate you on the extraordinary work that your organization is doing. I think in reference to corporate level, yes, and I must admit my lack of qualification to talk about this issue in depth, but what I understand in principle is that the same principles of governance that are relevant to political system are also relevant to the corporate world in terms of openness, in terms of transparency, in terms of challenging corrupt practices. The principles and morals provided by the Islamic system of governance are equally relevant and applicable to the corporate level. And especially, if I may say, in this age and era globally of materialism and of, in some ways, the inequality that we see in economic levels around the world and even in the developing world between the, if I may use the Marxist term, I wouldn't have used it during the times of Soviet Union, but now as an academic I can use it just to explain my point. The discrepancy between haves and have-nots, even in developed countries today, or the inequality in income and the privileges are also a serious issue, and those, in my understanding, are a consequence of poor corporate management, not only corporate management, but poor corporate practices. And we have seen the negative impacts of that at various levels, even in the Western societies and states. So yes, thank you very much for that question, and I should have referred to that, that yes, the corporate level governance can also derive principles from these principles of governance, especially those that are directly relevant to ethical and moral values, and a just system or an effective justice system in any country, which can be established beyond even any of the political systems in place. But if there is an effective justice system, the corporate side of things will equally benefit from that just and fair order. But thank you very much for the question.
Thank you so much, Professor Hassan, and I wish you a blessed Ramadan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tayyam, for your question and making it interactive. Let me move to the next caller. We have Brother Wali Zahid. You raised your hand, sir. Can you hear us? Could you introduce yourself, where you're calling from, and please ask the question to Professor Hassan Abbas.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Wali Zahid, and I am CEO of Skill City training and coaching firm based in Bahrain. One principle of governance you just highlighted is taking care of ordinary people and holding the powerful people into check. How come most governance systems today are just opposite of that? That's one question. The other part is, do you foresee any government utilizing this principle in the near future?
Another excellent question, and within your question, you have, I think, very appropriately criticized that's kind of a tragedy that people of a faith system who were inspired through divine guidance in such a monumental way have lost touch with the central principles of their religious belief, which I think are based on tolerance and pluralism and openness, and it is because of not pursuing these principles of justice system and equality that we have seen the rights of the ordinary people being violated on daily basis in a variety of ways. Whether I can see some changes happening, I think there will be. I don't want to name specific countries, but in the recent couple of years, or some years, there was this lot of initially hope and expectation from, if I may call that, Arab Spring. I always had a trouble with calling it Arab Spring because spring comes and goes, and then summer and winter comes. But this Arab awakening, if I may call that, if it's not offensive to any of my listeners, but by that I mean a change. And we didn't realize that change cannot really come from merely coming on the streets. Change is a much more dynamic, much more deep-rooted issue, which requires institutional strength, which requires conscientious leadership, which needs education at a very broad level. That's why Islam really emphasizes on the establishment of an education system, because without that pillar and without that foundation, nothing else will work. A few capable leaders who are, even if they are honest and capable, cannot serve their country or government or community in an effective fashion if the community's majority is uneducated or the literacy level is low. So my view is that I don't see any immediate change, because the immediate change may come in terms of coming out in the center of the city holding a placard, which is also important, which I'm not demeaning that, or which I'm not saying that should not happen. Yes, people have right to express themselves in a peaceful fashion to improve the system. But I don't see any immediate chance of a major transformation. However, I am seeing through social media and through a more open debate, and in many countries, some transformations that are taking place. In recent years, I have seen people, for instance, from Saudi Arabia, from Bahrain also actually, and from Egypt, from Iraq, from Iran, from Pakistan. The younger generation of Muslims, I think, are now more aware of not only their tradition, but also global developments. And from those global developments, they're constantly scratching their head and they're saying, what has gone wrong within the Muslim tradition, why we are not pursuing principles of equity and justice and empowerment and tolerance and pluralism. So I have much more hope from the younger generation, and it's a great thing that many of the Muslim countries, in fact, are investing more in education. I can give you an example actually of two special countries. I've heard in Malaysia and actually Saudi Arabia, which are hugely investing in their younger generation by giving them scholarships. That gives me hope for actually, because although these are two countries, but people from these countries and other countries can provide a new leadership in the corporate level, leadership at social level, leadership at political level, which can transform things. But I am, if I may, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I don't see any immediate chances of change, but this gradual change will most definitely come from the younger generation in the Muslim world. That's my hope, and that's my expectation.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Wali Zahid, for asking this question. Let me now move to the question box. There's a question from Dr. Khalid Sheikh, who's the CEO of Al-Aqsa Institute, Dubai. The question is, could you like to mention few hurdles in implementation of Islamic system of governance?
Another broad question, but a very important question. I immediately, I think the very first hurdle in the implementation of this idea, again, is lack of education. And I'm repeating myself, but it is worth repeating. That irrespective of some bright intellectuals and conscientious leaders and people who have resources at their hands, if the people at the other end or the other side of the divide are not capable to even understand these intricacies, if our religious scholarship has become so focused on, if I may call that, divisive issues or sectarianism, then the whole message that has to come out of religious spirituality gets lost. So lack of education, both in the political sense, also in the religious sense, I think is a major hurdle. Secondly, the elites, in many ways, even those who are educated, and let me use this one sentence, elites who are even educated can misuse their authority because people at the other end even don't know that their rights are being trampled upon. So education is only effective when it is widespread, because otherwise those few people with education and knowledge will misuse the system. I don't want to refer to the Hobbes theory that every human being is trying to get the most out of the political system and the wealth, and there's this constant strong rivalry and competition going on, which is going after each other's blood. But I would certainly say that those elites, it can be feudal, it can be political, it can be social in various parts of the world, whose interest is that there should be lack of pluralism, whose interest is that the justice system should not be based on the rule of law system, because then their interests will get hurt. That is a hurdle that can only be tackled through empowerment of the ordinary people. So the education, I would say, is the most central hurdle, and I'll encourage my listeners, if in any way what they can do. Because of course these are big ideas and open to debate and discussion, but all of us at our individual levels can contribute, and we can contribute even by helping one kid get educated, or those who are corporate leaders and have more resources by helping one school at a time. That I think is the way forward to defeat the hurdles that are also very strong, not only in the Muslim world but throughout the world today.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question in the question box. Considering we are now in 21st century, where systems and processes and governance are being optimized towards e-governance, what are some of the top urgent areas of focus would you recommend Muslim nations to focus upon strengthening a stable governance?
I think the e-governance and the social media and the modern tools of communication can best be utilized, one, to empower the people, secondly, to connect the people. If I may call that, in recent years, I've actually just 2 weeks ago, I had a chance to travel to 3 countries for different conferences, to Turkey, briefly to Saudi Arabia, and then also to Iran. Very different countries, but all very rich in their tradition and playing an important role in different eras of their history. And I realized that in the academia, and that's because that's my field, I know more about it, even in these three countries, and I can mention many others as well, where excellent work is being done by academia, but there is no interconnectivity. And by interconnectivity, I mean work in different languages also places a barrier. I'm not saying we should just leave our scholarship in Persian or Arabic or Turkish or Urdu, but I'm saying within the Muslim world, this language barrier has somehow to be dealt, because excellent research work and a lot of scholarly work in both in religious sense and the political sense and in technological sense is available. But because of lack of interconnectivity, because of systems, because of some of the possibility politics, Muslims are not being able to benefit from the great work which is even being produced today. I hope my question is relevant to you. Your question also has a technical side which I'm not qualified to answer, but even there I would think more connectivity, effective communication systems to benefit from each other's wisdom and experience, and also the connectivity between I would say West and East in general terms is also important. Frankly, in many countries that I have visited in Middle East and South Asia, I've seen that in educational institutions, the capacity of students to learn modern languages or international languages, English, French, for instance, I would even say Chinese, there's not enough investment in that. So yes, we can have a great scholar sitting in Oman or UAE who's sitting in a beautiful building with a lot of resources, but unless he or she can communicate with Western institutions or with Chinese institutions for that matter, because of the language barrier, you'll not be able to really benefit from the dividend of this new empowering tool of communication that we have today.
Thank you very much. Let me move to another question. In fact, let me try to unmute because the question is not clear. Brother Muhammad Fajil Al-Ghani, can you hear us? Sir, you have posted the question and which was not clear. I would like you to ask directly if you could speak up or introduce yourself. Brother Fajil, Muhammad Fajil, can you hear us, sir? I think we have an audio issue. So let me move to one last quick question. As I understand, it's Asr time in this part of the world now, especially in the Saudi Arabia. So let us try to conclude before we do that. Let me just take this one last question. So what would you advise to OIC to restructure itself or make themselves more effective to engage Muslim leaders?
Another excellent question. I think first of all, OIC has to stop being, and I'll use strong words because I really feel that OIC has many resources and it can be such an effective body, but it has not proved its worth so far, but I'm very hopeful about its future. But first and foremost, it has to be much more than a debating center. We have many avenues in media and academia and social settings to debate. OIC has to be different. Secondly, I would think that the kind of agenda that OIC has for itself is very broad. They can be specific, just pick 2 or 3 things. For instance, laws related to human rights in the Muslim world, gender-related issues. You'll see that increasingly women within the Muslim world are getting empowered through education, but that empowerment and that brilliance that the Muslim women have is not reflected in the corporate world nor in the political sense. So OIC can pick up one of these issues, gender issues or empowerment of women, or the plight of the women in many parts of the Muslim world, especially in rural settings where there is lack of education, the atrocities that women go through, or the plight or the difficulties, I should say, that women go through are huge. And we know from Islamic traditions, I mean, think about the history of Islam and the importance of the great women. Without Hazrat Khadija, whether Islam could really have benefited from the resources that were made available to it in the initial years? No. Look at the great scholarly traditions coming out of Hazrat Aisha, or the great spiritual teachings of Bibi Fatima Zahra, or the Bibi Zainab after Karbala. The point I'm making, the tradition of women empowering brilliant, intelligent, courageous women in Muslim history is obvious to anyone. But in the modern sense, we have not been able to do that. So OIC can take up one or two of these issues, education or women empowerment, and just stick to it and galvanize the Muslim world on this 1 or 2 point agenda. They cannot have 10 ideas, debate it, and then provide a few $1 million there, which will go into the coffers of corrupt officials in one of those countries where those ideas introduced, and then go home. I think they can pick, and I would highly recommend first picking up the issue of women empowerment and helping women utilize their potential and benefit the world. And that will be my suggestion.
That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. I would like to thank you, Professor Hassan Abbas, on behalf of MILE, for taking this time to share your valuable information and an excellent presentation. Any concluding remarks you would like to give, sir, before we conclude?
Thank you very much. I will actually thank you for this opportunity to connect people from across the globe, and that's the model to go for. And what better place can be to start this initiative and to galvanize people than from Madinah. So please, all of those listeners, remember me in your prayers in this month. That will be my concluding remark.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar, and thank you for posting these questions and making it an interactive experience for all of us. We are recording this webinar. A recorded version of this webinar along with this presentation for download will be available on our community of practices, which is community.mile.org. This webinar recording will be updated in about 2 to 3 days from now, so please stay tuned to our community portal, which is I'm just broadcasting on as a chat. It's called community.mile.org. You can in fact download lots of previous webinars from our archive section and the presentations, and can join different community of practices which is being maintained by renowned subject experts from all across the globe. With that, I would like to end this webinar with a small note and announcement that on 23rd we are having another live event on the same platform for SMART KPIs, Key Performance Indicators. The research director of smartkpis.com will be actually giving this presentation, so please do sign up. The registration is open on our community and you can freely join it. Thank you very much. You all have a wonderful day, evening or morning, wherever you're joining us from, and Ramadan Kareem once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.